Evening, everyone. Hearing me? Is this? Yeah, okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Rachelle Mosley Wood. I'm the head of the Department of Literatures and English, and it is my immense pleasure to welcome you here to the launch of recent works by Paulette A. Ramsay. And these works are The Thing That Is Not a Thing, Letters Home, and Through the Hibiscus Hedge. I'm really, it's a long time since I've kind of stood here for a book launch. We tend to do things online. So it's really good to see all of you come out on a wet Friday evening in December. I think that must be a tribute to Paulette. And our regard and love and affection for Paulette, and of course our regard for her talent as a writer. So welcome everybody, and wonderful to see you. Welcome to the Dean of our faculty, Professor Sylvia Cohenberg, the University Librarian, Dr. Paulette Carr, the retirees from the Department of Modern Languages and Literatures, from the Confucius Center, friends, well-wishers, lovers of literature, friends of the Faculty of Humanities and Education, welcome all. We have quite a lengthy program to get through, and we are going to try to move through quickly so that you will not meet too much traffic going back home. And what we're going to do is that we're going to have people coming up as they are listed in the program without me having to navigate the big step here and, up and down. So please come up as you are listed in the program. As I said, welcome. I'm very happy to be here for a number of reasons. As I said, coming out of COVID, getting back into face-to-face events, it is just wonderful to see so many of you here. But of course, I'm also happy to be here in this capacity because Paulette herself is a great friend of the Department of Literatures and English. You might be saying, well, what am I doing here? I'm Literatures and English. Paulette, as you know, is Modern Languages and Literatures. But you realize there's a bit of a crossover. But Paulette is really, a staunch supporter of our department. She's somebody who you can call on for assistance to do something, and you know that she will be there. I recently did have occasion to call on her for the West Indian Literature Conference, and without hesitation, Paulette obliged and responded. Of course, as the Department of Literatures in English, yes, we have a vested interest in offering support to members of the literary community. And of course, Paulette is right there. This is the launch of not one, not two, but three. So Paulette is certainly an accomplished academic, but also a prolific writer of creative literary works. And we are happy to recognize her talent and to recognize the significance of the publication of these works by hosting this event tonight. So Paulette, it is our pleasure as our neighbor down the corridor and as our friend and a writer of significance that we are very happy to host this launch for you and in your honor. So we are going to move right ahead with a poetry reading by Fabian M. Thomas. This will be followed by a musical item, and then reviews of two of the books, presentations, and then eventually the author's response. So Fabian, I welcome you up to the podium and ask that others listed in the program just proceed as they see themselves listed. Thank you.
Thank you, please, Lady Rachelle. Greetings and salutations. Look here, when people greet, they must answer, yeah? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Manners a keep. When I was a student on this auspicious campus about 100 years ago, I'm glad that Spirit and the ancestors nudged me to pay attention. And I say it repeatedly, I had a lineup and cadre of lecturers that you can't pay for. Edward Ball was one of them. And I must speak his name. What a marvelous man. What a beacon of light. And that voice and the world he opened up for us. Prof, bless you and walk good. And we're going to say, as your poem say, Eddie dead, he did not transition, he did not move on. If you don't know that poem by him, it's a delightful, very short poem where he's lamenting that nobody dies anymore. That people use these euphemisms, and the lady say, when me go tell them, say, Maeve is dead. She never transitioned. Prof. Ramsay, big up yourself. Blessings, 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 blessings. I had the distinct honor to do a little short film for Let Us Home when Hodder was launching it. So I'm in the presence of royalty. I mix up with good people. An honor that Prof asked me to be here with you today. The first one I'm going to read is Thornbird. You are my thornbird, my singular source of rapture, now as you were in the beginning. The one I see amidst the flock of 1,000 others. I am your forever bird watcher from the edges of cliffs, from the banks of rivers. I watch as you soar, spread your wings, dodge cumbersome clouds, glide through blue skies. I watched as others, more skillful, tracked you briefly, even in broken nets. Once I heard a catapult stone brought you to the ground, you healed yourself and flew away before I got to you. Sometimes I am sure you're headed straight towards my outstretched hands. I wait for you to flap your wings and land on my hands, on my shoulder, even on my head. But as you get close to me, you soar high above my head and seek refuge in the clouds again and again. I watch you now and smile, take pleasure in seeing you soar, dodge the clouds, fly above my head, make me believe you see my outstretched hands, fly around me, away from me, show the strength of your wings, making me think one day I could climb on them and fly with you away from the edge of the cliff. Next poem, Human Rights. We will not bow down to racism. We will not bow down to injustice. We're gonna stand. We gon' stand. We all have rights, they say. Human rights. Right to do so and so, right to say so and so, right to live, right to eat. Some fight to show their rights. Some fight to show this thing called human rights is not a thing. Not a thing for all. For some, not all, should not speak, should not do, or even be. What a thing. What a bam bam, bam bam dilam bam bam. This is Jamaican ugly man syndrome. One teeth in the mouth that God give him. One twist up tooth like ficus root. One eye, face look like S, but him think him nice. So in a hardware store, for example, you know say you look good. You know say you're just a dazzler in your brand new stretch Levi or whatever brand you prefer. You're buying your bowl for your Saturday soup. A one teeth, bend up foot, S-face man come tell you, yes, that is a nice one. You civilize, so you just smile. Him walk off, then turn back and say, that one is my size. I can come up for soup this evening. Of course, the bowl drop out of your hand and broke. You look at him and you open your mouth and close it. You don't know if you feel sorry for him or vexed with him. You ask him, you have a mirror? Him say, yes, me have a mirror. You shake your head. You know it's a sign of Jamaican ugly man syndrome. The uglier them be, the more familiar them be. Because there is not one Jamaican ugly man that know or believe that him is ugly. Every Jamaican man, street boy, madman, hungry man, brokefoot man, think him full eye. You ever see how madman eye light up if you're full eye? It's true. Gully man or rat man think him can get any woman. For there is not one Jamaican ugly man who think him is ugly. I wonder why nobody don't like me. Is it a fact that I'm ugly? Mama look up, boo-boo. They shout, they mother tell them, shut up your mouth. That is my daddy. Oh no, my daddy can be ugly so. This one is called Take Back Your Old Brock. Papa's old Austin Cambridge huffed and puffed, groaned and moaned as it crawled into the garage. We ran out to greet him, but more so to get a toffee for me, a lollipop for Junior, a penny-shaped bubble gum for G, a paradise plum for B. The things he brought home in his pockets were always more enticing to us than his half-smiling face. This day was different. He quietly opened the trunk, pointed to the parcel he had collected at the post office. Parcel from England, he said. Half tired, half impressed. We were very impressed. Our eyes opened wide as we looked at the big box wrapped in brown paper and half covered in stamps with the face of Mrs. Queen, as Mama used to say, and our aunt's firm, teacher-like cursive. Mr. J.L. Hofstede, Biggersteth, P.O., Jamaica, West Indies. Our eyes opened wide. Parcel come, we whispered. Parcel come. Just loud enough to hear each other, but soft enough so Papa wouldn't scold us for over-eagerness. So strict and proper he was. Finally, we got our own parcel, like our friends, who always showed off new shoes, new frock, pretty things they got in parcel. Sometimes they were ugly. Papa picked up the huge box and grunted on discovering it wasn't light. We ran behind him as he struggled to take the clumsy box into the house. Mama came into the living room as he put the box on the floor. Bring the scissors, she pointed to us children. As she sat down and her eyes got shiny and bright with expectation, we all gathered around and watched. Papa cut away the brown paper and cut and snip, snip, scrunch, crunch. Jaws dropped in unison. Loud gasps escaped our 6 mouths. Papa said nothing. Mama opened her mouth and clapped it shut. G said, old shoes. Sue said, old clothes. Shush, Mama said, the neighbors will hear. Papa sank his forklift hands deep into the box. We watched limp string after limp string fall back into the space, seeking refuge in its ample depth. Papa said not a word. He quietly closed the box. Pass me a pen and paper, he said dryly. Then he sat and wrote in big bold letters, my dear sister Vi, take back your old Brock. He folded the paper neatly, gently put it on top of the rags. Tomorrow I will post the box right back to my sister in England, he said quietly, as if it was just the right thing to do. Dinner time, he said, rubbing his hands, looking relieved in his face. Wife, what you cook today? A nice piece of butcher Guthrie steak. All right, Papa said, all right, steak time. Come we sit and eat good Jamaican steak. No old Brock from England for we. My uncle said goodbye today. Wondering why my uncle decided to drop out today of all days. This week of all weeks. Why not last month or 2 months from now? But now when I have so many things to do, bills to pay, house to paint, just buy a new car and a new apartment, and this is not a convenient time at all. Have no money to pay for wake, pay for repast at hotel, glass casket and all. Those things that he said he want, leave long list with others. Who must be pallbearer, who must sing, who must not dare to sing for they can't sing, who must preach, who must not preach for they can't preach, who must do eulogy for they write and spell well. All of that is fine. But he should really pick a better time to go. Make it easier for me to help send him off in style according to his orders. Send me home in style. Him not have no money to send himself in style, and I have none to send him home in style. But when all is said and done, I have to bury him, bury him, bury him, all of him, good and proper. Me uncle dead and gone, and he no left no will, but he left one house, I feed the whole of we. But maybe God brother, he take away from we. Glory be to God. Glory be to God, I feed the whole of we. Rest and swallow your spit.
Oh, yeah, put it here. My apologies, I've really been remiss. I promised not to come up and down, but I'm really remiss not to really invoke Professor Ball's name as we began. And we did intend to have a moment of silence in his honor and to respect him. Yes. So I'm going to ask you now to just bow your heads for a moment to remember our beloved Professor Ball, who passed away quite recently. And then we will have a song in tribute. Thank you.
Before I begin, please permit me to announce on Professor Ramsay's behalf that Through the Hibiscus Hedge is available digitally on Apple Books, Smashwords, and Shop Vivlio. Through the Hibiscus Hedge tells of children who veer off course into sticky situations and amuse themselves by pushing boundaries, but also of the adults who outwit and surprise them. Set in the beautiful Jamaican countryside, where trees grow in all shades of green, roosters crow fiercely, and youngsters can fly over mountain ranges, this collection of short stories by Paulette A. Ramsay is woven together by themes of discovery, loss, and the coming of age. Written in lyrical prose, Through the Hibiscus Hedge affirms the personhood of children observed in their refreshing curiosity and boldness. Bearing an intriguing title that dares to pull the reader in, Through the Hibiscus Hedge contains 8 pieces, including The Day My Grandmother Folded Her Wings and Put on Her Horns, Sunday Spectacle, and one fitting for this time of year, Christmas Siesta. While Through the Hibiscus Hedge is appropriate for young readers and beautifully captures why children are a precious gift to society, the collection also appeals to adults, especially those of us who spent our childhood in places and times we may describe as special, but also strange. Caleb, the story that opens the collection, expresses that special, strange duality all of us can probably attest to when we reflect on our own stories of origin. Here begins an excerpt from Caleb. We knew how long his banging and shouting would continue. We didn't have to time it or have a clock in the hedge to tell the time, but we just knew, my brother and I, that the shouting would continue long enough for us to do what we did through the hibiscus hedge. That was the point at which one of us had to run frantically back to our house to see if we were yet discovered missing. We took turns doing this. We would dash to the house, check the kitchen, then the veranda to make sure that our mother was still busily cooking or sitting on the veranda waiting for a chance to greet everybody who passed by on the road and then, depending on who it was, mutter some snide, sarcastic, or disparaging comment under her breath about them. If our mother was safely in the kitchen, we would dash back to our place by the hibiscus hedge and watch Caleb's pot as it happily bubbled and gurgled. We started watching him when it occurred to us that he was strange. He did not speak to anyone, not my mother, not my father, not the neighbors on the other side, not the people who passed on the road and called out chirpily, "Morning, Mr. Caleb." We didn't see him when he left his house in the mornings because he left before the sun came up, as my father would say. But we saw him every evening when he passed us sitting on the veranda. At first, we made a little hole in the hibiscus hedge, and we would take turns to put one eye next to it, cover the other eye with one hand, and follow his movements. But soon we got impatient watching each other watch him. Somehow, we soon felt that the other person's watch was more exciting, and we would quickly change places. We didn't want to miss anything, so my brother decided to make the hole big enough so we both could see through it at the same time. We started putting our faces cheek to cheek, one person's shoulder fitting into the space between the neck and shoulder of the other as we watched. We did not speak to each other. If a dumpling dropped to the ground when he was putting it into the pot, we quietly just looked at each other, rolled our eyes deliberately, and bit our lips to prevent ourselves from laughing out loud. When he had used up all the dough to make his dumplings, 12 of them every day, he would cover the pot, pick up the fallen dumpling, and throw it dispassionately into the hibiscus hedge. Sometimes we wondered how he didn't see us. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. It is an honor and pleasure for me to speak at the celebration of Paulette's work. At the same time, the occasion takes me back to memories that come with mixed feelings, among them sadness. About 20 years ago, Paulette and I launched our first novels in a joint event at Mona. Paulette's novel Aunt Jen was launched by the great Eddie Ball, whose passing we now mourn. I wasn't going to mention this because I didn't want to put a damper on the evening, but then I said, how can I not? In this moment of the coincidence of memories. The coincidence that I'm asked to speak about Letters Home, the prequel to that first novel. The coincidence that Eddie's spirit is among us now, here, too. We know we will not look upon his like again. We mourn and we offer our feeble condolences to Sheila, Catherine, and Sarah, but we celebrate him as we also know that we are walking in the legacy of his light. As scholars, writers, and persons who learned somewhat of generosity by Eddie's example, Paulette and I are indebted. Rest in peace, Edward Ball. I am trying at short notice to turn a literary conference paper into a presentation appropriate for a book launch. If I succeed only imperfectly, Paulette and my audience do forgive. My hope is that my extended framing before I get into the meat of Letters Home will begin to indicate the large importance of this book as it speaks to contemporary history and future-defining current events. As it breaks down monuments, not in the way monuments were broken down in the USA after George Floyd, but by gently, understatedly reminding us how important it is to approach our history with a nuanced understanding, putting us in mind of Jean Rhys's immortal statement, there's always the other side, always. I am constantly dazzled by this literature called Caribbean. It's so protean, always renewing itself, experimenting with new forms, finding fresh ways to trouble the boundaries set by those Camilla calls universal men. I think of Miguel Barnett writing a Cuban Maroon's autobiography in the form of a novel. Jamaica Kincaid's character writing her mother's autobiography without asking her mother a word about it. Erna Broadbent making fiction part of the scientific and higher science procedure. And here Paulette Ramsay in Letters Home writing real life, oral life histories into the form of the novel. So the literature is a living, moving archive shaped through imagination. Now my reflection is titled Rerouting the Scripts, Paulette Ramsay's Letters Home and the Ships That Were Not Windrush, 1940s to 1960s. The publication of this novel coincides with the escalation of the so-called Windrush scandal and renewed focus on the Windrush generation in Britain. The role assigned to Windrush in Caribbean literary history has for some time been questioned by scholars, but Letters Home allows me to ask the questions through a different lens. For example, what was the role of other ships and the SS Empire Windrush in the lived experience of Caribbean Britishers? How might we rethink Caribbean literary history as the book uses metaphor and life history to highlight women's writing in the Windrush era and lays out different drivers of women's migration versus men's? 86 infants and children traveled on the Windrush in 1948. And Paulette's engagement with children's migration in that context opens up another area for researchers to look at. Now we know that ships were central to the Caribbean experience from the very beginning of colonization up till now, although now it's cruise ships. Yet except for a very few, such as Columbus's 3, Captain Bligh's Bounty, the slave ship Zong, the Fatel Razak that brought indentured workers from India, and of course the Windrush, the names of these ships are either unknown or are not part of conscious memory. Writers who have used ships to tell stories or make theory have not named the ships. George Lamming, for example, in The Pleasures of Exile, did not name the ship on which he and Samuel Selvon traveled to London. Selvon does not name the Windrush in The Lonely Londoners. Andrea Levy does not tell us what ships her characters sailed on in Small Island. Patricia Powell does not name the ship sailing from China to Jamaica with indentured workers in her novel The Pagoda. The Windrush gave its name to 3 generations of Caribbean Britishers. It gave its name also to markers on the British-built landscape and to an entire history of how Caribbean literature came about in Britain. And I think I'm going to try to show you some of the monuments that mark the Windrush, not because I want to keep this as the conference paper, but just to, sort of focus in your mind what I mean when I say Paulette's book is, pushing against monuments. These are material monuments. Mm. Mm. I seem to have got this not so good. I want to share this. Yeah. And the square. Then we have the Windrush statue. Want to scroll this up. Celebrating the National Health Service's Windrush nurses unveiled in London in September 2021. And the last one I want to show you is the Windrush Monument. Let's scroll it down. Okay, sorry. Something went wrong there. Monument. Right, there we go. The National Windrush Monument. So you can see my note at the bottom and it goes off again. And I seeming to be doing a very good job with this sharing. One more time. There we go. Right, okay. Right. The National Windrush Monument by Jamaican artist Basil Watson, unveiled by Prince William at Waterloo Station on June 22nd, 2022. Just to give you a more visual sense of what I mean when I say the novel pushes in a very interesting way against monuments. So although the SS Ormond and the SS Almanzora brought significant numbers and categories of West Indians to Britain before Windrush arrived, and although many of the ships, such as the Auriga, the Repinia, the Castle Verde, the Georgic, the Sorrento, the Reina del Pacifico, the Orbiter, to name a few, brought at least as many passengers as the Windrush's 1,000 and odd, the Windrush is the only ship we hear about in the literary history. It's also the only ship that looms large in the extant history of Caribbean Britain and the media coverage of the current human rights, civil rights, and deportation crisis. And that crisis that we started hearing about from about 2014 or earlier, it wasn't new. It was set in train by Margaret Thatcher's 1983 version of the infamous 1971 Immigration Act. Numerous documentaries, some by Caribbean Britishers, take us well into the 21st century, and yet all of them are anchored in this idea of Windrush, this icon of Windrush. There is no doubt that the large image of Windrush is partly because it served UK colonial and imperial self-packaging. But also, this ship is a major identity marker for Caribbean Britishers and their concepts of futures. Windrush narrative marks their presence as Britishers. That is part of their identity. One thing about literature, though, is how we can unearth evidence to show that the details, the hidden differences which are hidden because nobody shouts about them, matter enormously. And this is where I get directly to Letters Home. Letters Home lets us see that there were other ships and that this mattered hugely in how some Caribbean Britishers see themselves. And the book does the kind of work that George Lamming, Samuel Selvon, and other seminal writers did for that generation of migrants. It tells their story, but by letting us see that there were other stories, this time the stories of the women who went. A bit of context. The first novel, Aunt Jen, tells the story of Sunshine, Aunt Jen's daughter, left behind in Jamaica with her grandparents when Jen left for England in 1961. Sunshine writes her mother letters that Jen never answers. At the end of the novel, the letters fall into the hands of Sunshine's daughter, April, and there's an intimation that Sunshine, unable to cross the gulf left by her mother's seeming abandonment, had never actually sent the letters. Letters Home picks up the story mostly from Jen's point of view, but partly from the point of view of Jen's brother Albert, who also went to England, on the Windrush in 1948. Jen went on the SS Iripinia in 1961. Their sister Elsie and another brother Roy went in 1952 and 1956, respectively, on two of the SS Auriga's multiple voyages. Their two stories are framed symbolically by yellow and black ribbons tying together the two sets of letters. They're also framed by the editorship of April, Sunshine's daughter, who is remitting the letters to her mother in a kind of reverse passage after Jen dies in Birmingham, having bequeathed the letter passages to April. I hope that is not too convoluted. But just to say that this story is a prequel sequel to Aunt Jen, okay, which, by the way, you might know was reissued as a Caribbean classic in 2021, the same time that Letters Home came out. The letters through which Jen's and Albert's stories are told calibrate a migration anguish that you hear in the recurrent, "I did not know life could be so hard till I came to England," in the constant repetition of words lonely and loneliness that spread Selvon's term The Lonely Londoners across the lives of multiple women and men who arrived on other ships. You see this migration anguish also in the motif of people entrapped in confined spaces, just as there has been no room in the inn for travelers on the other ships, in the narrative inn, so to speak. All the major characters, except for Jenson Cielo, are migrants who arrived in the Windrush period, but mostly on other named ships. So the novel is immediately inserting itself against the monolithic Windrush narrative, giving us nuance. Also, the centrality of other ships, signifying other narratives, other ways of telling, is made clear in the book in many ways. One such way is the use of embedded stories. Some of the women I know, especially some that come here before me from Windrush days, I came at the end of Windrush. Albert's letter in Stream of Consciousness reflects his loss of mental order after he's beaten by the notorious Teddy Boys, young white hoodlums patrolling streets in search of lone black men to beat or murder in defense of British racial purity. Again, no upbeat Windrush narrative. Some people never recovered after their first voyage, and Albert is honored by the black ribbon that ties up his letters, not by the Victoria Cross, Jen recounts the harsh, destabilizing experience of the Iripinia's 21-day voyage from Jamaica to Genoa, because the Iripinia was an Italian ship, then to France, then the transfer from the Iripinia to the Dieppe, France, the docking of the Dieppe, France at New Haven, and the train ride from New Haven to Victoria Station. We knew about Victoria, but how many of us knew that the ships came in at New Haven? If we were to track the routes taken by all these ships before their arrival in Britain, for example, in the Windrush's route collecting Polish passengers from Tampico, Mexico, West Indians from Trinidad and Bermuda, and then Jamaica, what global middle passages of modernity and relation might we find? That's a kind of question Paulette has us thinking about. Recounting other travels in Jen's family, Paulette brings into a globalizing circle. Jen's father sojourns in Panama, a priest from Mauritius who christens the baby Sunshine in Jamaica, Roy's remigration to America, the double back return journeys of some of them who went back to Jamaica, but found no ground of re-belonging, and so they recrossed the Atlantic back to the UK. And so that long historical arc of globalization in which these ships participated is not lost on the reader. And Jen remembering Genoa remarks in a tone of wonderment. Imagine, I went to Columbus home. Later, she reflects on Thatcher's immigration restrictions, Theresa May's extension of these, Brexit, and the Windrush scandal. And in this way, she makes us see the global present that extends from Windrush and the ships that came after and before. Part of what gives significance to Jen's voyage and the novel's entire subject matter is Paulette's use of life histories. She explained in a WhatsApp interview that she drew on interviews with family and their friends who went through these experiences. Jen's letter voice reveals both a consciousness rooted in 1960s rural Jamaican vernacular and a strong allegiance to correct British English. And even in recounting the most painful scenes, the book is often very funny in that vintage Jamaican and vintage Paulette way. And I think I would steal a little time and just read. I don't know if you'll find it funny, but I usually laugh. I laugh when I read some of these things. This is Jen. I did have a man in my life for many years who made my life a living hell. He was not Australian or English, he was Portuguese. He was one of those Portuguese wretches who was living in my sister's house. One day at my sister's house, I caught him looking at me. What are you looking at me for? I shouted at him. Look nice, very pretty, pretty. No, I do not look nice. I am a black, ugly woman from the West Indies. I am not nice. Just tell yourself that and don't look at me. I am ugly. I shouted at him, and I never spoke to him or looked at him again for weeks. I felt like pushing the fork in his eyes. But one night when I was not expecting it, the wretch ambushed me in the backyard. I fought him like a lion, but he was a stronger mountain lion and the wretch overpowered me. He would have raped me if it wasn't for one of my sister's friends who was coming to have a bath. That man, I cannot even remember his name now, came to the backyard and saw the struggle and pulled him off and gave him some good punches. Portuguese ran away for 2 weeks. When the wretch came back after 2 weeks, he was like a lamb to the slaughter. He fell on his face at my sister's feet and asked for forgiveness and said he did not know what made him do it. Do what? My sister kept asking till I shouted out, try to rape me. The wretch did not know I didn't tell my sister before, and when she heard what he did, she boxed him and kicked him over and over on the floor till he howled like Miss Jane Dog on Moonshine Night. She kicked him right through the door and locked it with him on the step. But the next morning he was on the steps, and so she called Roy and told him, and he came and gave him another beating. Roy gave him some cowlicks till he begged for mercy. Please, please. I shouldn't laugh, that is funny. Mercy, mercy. No, never put your hand on her again, Roy said. You think I beat you now, boy? I will give you some good Jamaican manlick. Never put your hand on her again. You hear me? You hear me, white boy? Never, he said. I know. Pretty black girl, no white boy. She just, does this thing, you just laugh, and it's so Jamaican, even though it's really not funny. And this is where I see these experiences that she's telling as an alternative history of Caribbean literary production. Selman is doing this Trinidad voice in Lonely Donors. Paulette is doing this other thing with the Nancy Jamaican voice and its love for English, playing between the two. Then you also get the framing of the novel as letters home, invoking the real ways in which letter writing formed a bridge of connection, an active remittance process, and a literary gathering that links migrants, their families, and friends back home. What would happen if we collected all those letters as an archive? People from my generation will remember those letters. Greetings in the name of Jesus, who is soon coming King. I hope this letter finds you in the best of health. In the book, the letters are carefully tied up with ribbon and preserved in boxes and in a suitcase as if waiting to be shipped. And that was a practice in those times, so we're getting important social history. Albert's stream of consciousness narrative is strategically placed at the end of a novel, and it serves as a commentary on how memory, with its slippages and so-called disordered ways of knowing, is a realistic way of telling history. So this places fiction and memory on equal footing, and maybe more with formalized historical accounts. April, as annotator and self-appointed literary executor, makes a case for the lectors as women's literature in a period when women writers were largely invisible and supposedly few. Still, Jen tells Sunshine, if you're interested, you would publish them so we can help some people to understand some of the things that happened to West Indian people who went to England from Windrush until now. And Jen comments not only on the unheard stories of those who came on other ships, but also on the non-existence, according to Windrush generation women's writing. A lot of what I write to you, my reluctant reader, I write from deep in my memory. Maybe one day I will put my name, no name on my writing. It will be just something that I write. Perhaps the Windrush takes that letters who most closely dialogues with his Selborne's The Lonely Londoners, but there are also echoes with Lamming's Emigrants. Here I am thinking about these novels as stories about the problem of space, a problem Jen encounters in London's near wasteland. If you've read Londoners, there's no way you can forget the scene when Selborne's one major female figure, the out of place, out of order, old Jamaican matriarch, Patanti, elbows space for herself on Harris's crowded dance floor. Don't push. Jen gives us a history of the evolution of Caribbean British dance from dancehall to house dance to the establishment of the famous Crown and Cushion pub. She reveals how dancing was one of the earliest and most enduring ways West Indian women as well as men created space to live and breathe in the unlivable loneliness of their lives. And though Jen's is the story of her own individual life, the presence and presentness of women come alive in ways that Selborne's novel was able to show. And this thing Selborne was just saying in the women's story here is really an important thing. Jen presents leaving Jamaica as a loss of living space through cycles of repetition. I never knew hard life until I come to England. I live in one room with 9 other people. It is too cold, too rainy, too dark, too ugly, and their grandparents' house in Jamaica is nicer than this crowded one room. The first night I bathed in the middle of the house, I was nervous. It wasn't private. At one level, the cramped space, lack of privacy, and enforced communal living can be read as the absence of a room of one's own. That is lack of space for women's writing. And do remember that Jen's letters are locked in a suitcase and have to await April's generation in order to be read and accept its writing. At another level, we reset certain assumptions. And this part resonates with me personally, because as I teach in the USA, where many of my students come with a stereotype that migrants who are not white are destitute, have nothing, and that's a direct quote from frequent statements, and America is their absolute salvation. They have no agency, nothing at all. Jen's shocked at the conditions in which she has to live before she bought her own house in England was not merely because she had assumed the colonial center was this modern place, as she says, with modern conveniences. It was also because of the contrast between the primitive conditions and her home in Jamaica, where her father, having made money in Panama, had landed a wide rural house with an indoor bath. Details such as these remind us that the migrants were not the poorest of the poor who could not have afforded the cost of passage, but highly skilled men. And although there were 96 domestics on the Windrush, there were also educated women. Jen's father had sent her to England to take up the opportunity offered for young women to be trained as nurses. And we do know that the Windrush's passenger list included almost no unskilled male laborers. The more than 60 skilled occupations listed include stenographer, secretary, nurse, dressmaker, cook, confectioner, beautician, and of course there were also the highly skilled ex-RAF personnel, including engineers on board. It was actually a middle class, emergent middle class, and rural gentry that emigrated, and I do hope for this and other reasons that the book is taught in the UK. Jen's record of her first years in England is focused on her existence within desolate interiors and crowded conditions that become dangerous and almost derail her life. But her sense of entrapment in migrant-owned space begins on board the Eurypenia, a ship touted for its beautiful features, including an upper deck where passengers could promenade freely. And you can actually go online and find pictures of it and the interior. Jen went up on deck only to watch others having fun. For her, the vast, wide blue space, quote, of the ocean signified only her loss of habitable space and the burden she carried of having been forced by her parents to leave her 3-month-old baby and her lover in case she brought further disgrace on the family. Jen's being sent to England to make a better woman of herself has irresistible echoes with Lamming's male characters in The Waiting Ship in his novel Emigrants, all going to England to make a man of yourself. But while the men are presented as a chorus of voices, a community of utterance, so to speak, united in a common journey towards an expectation, to quote Lamming, Jen is an isolate on a journey towards what she perceives as doom. None of Jen's family went from choice. They were made to go by their ambitious father who wanted more for them. Jen, because she was female and therefore the one carrying the disgrace of premarital pregnancy. Indeed, while I'm not equating fiction and real life, I do know that the onboard ship jubilation described by men who sailed on Windrush in some of the BBC documentaries I've seen, they are in marked contrast to Jen's life history, you know, life history based account, and may indicate a difference between the experience of, on the one hand, men going by choice, surrounded by other men and sometimes family, on a ship routed through more or less familiar spaces, and on the other hand, an already traumatized young single girl traveling alone on a more alien road, Italy and France, more alien road, Italy and France versus, Trinidad and Bermuda. It's not so far away in the way it is Trinidad and Bermuda. In the end, life improves by dint of Jen's thrift, determination, and hard work. Black lives improve through the community places they build and the inroads they make on the English political, economic, and cultural environment. As she says, though Jamaican food, a crucial resource, undergoes irrevocable and unwelcome changes in the transit across the Atlantic, still it is so much better than when I just came here and was living in people's houses in little spaces. Nearly 40 years after arriving in the UK, Jen briefly contemplates going back to Jamaica, which she calls home without quotation marks. But she recognizes that gulfs have been crossed that would have made it impossible for her to return. Not least of these is the absence of kin whose funeral she had not been able to attend because she was so poor at the time, and kin who now live elsewhere. And I think this dislocation of migrancy is something that in different ways cuts to the heart of many who live abroad and who have people living abroad. At the point where April is reading the letters, Jen has already died. In the end, it is the book of her and Albert's letters as history, legacy, and the sound of their voices, that survives. And this is what Paulette Ramsay has given us, a book of Caribbean letters that puts us in touch with unspoken histories while challenging us to investigate what those histories might mean. Paulette, congratulations. Bless you, my friend. Thank you all.
We have the UWI main library, Mona campus. Dr. Carr, is that you to receive? Thank you, Dr. Carr. Do we have a representative from the National Library of Jamaica? No? Yeah, from the Institute of Jamaica, representative? And from the Jamaica Library Service? No. Okay, so that's it. Can we now ask the author, Professor Paulette Ramsay, to respond?
Thank you, Dr. Mosleywood. Good evening, everyone. Let me begin by thanking you all for braving the weather. When I saw the rain this evening, I said, Miss Clue, nobody's coming. When we were here fixing up and so on. So I really thank you for coming. And I know that there are others who had given their word to be here, and I have no doubt that it's the rain that has kept them. The different libraries, for instance, had even sent the names of the persons who would have come. So we'll get them to them another time. It's interesting, Dr. Mosleywood and I did talk about having a moment of silence in honor of Professor Ball. But I was really moved by the way in which Cordella started her presentation, because Cordella doesn't forget anything anyway. But she remembers that it was Professor Ball who launched my first book, Aunt Jen. And I would add that when I wrote Aunt Jen, and I wrote this thing and I was walking around with this thing. That was a thing. It turns out to be not. I said, this thing, that's not a thing. And I showed it to, well, there was one person. I'll tell you, you will be happy to know that a lot of Aunt Jen was actually written in Barbados. When I used to go to CXC, and I would be in my hotel room, and there were some times when I shared room with a certain lady who just walked in, Mrs. Doreen Ellis, and I would show her some pages, and she would say, but it's good, man. Keep it up. You must write it. It's good. So, Doreen, thanks for the encouragement back then. But then I showed it to Dr. Myrtle Thompson, and she said to me, she said, no, you cannot hide this. You need to take it to Eddie. Can you imagine me taking my writing to Professor Ball? So I said, really? And she said, yes, if you don't take it to Eddie, I will take it to him myself. So one day I quietly, went stealthily up to Professor Ball's office door and knocked, and he said he was very surprised to see me. And then I told him, I was writing this thing, and Dr. Thompson says I'm to show it to you. And so I showed it to him, and Professor Ball was so generous and kind and encouraging. He was my biggest supporter. When I went back to him, he said, listen to me, publish it, publish it, publish it. And as a matter of fact, if you send it to publishers and they don't take it, I will publish it myself. I will find a way to publish. This is excellent work. And so he really gave me the, when you suddenly feel that really the great Eddie Ball says this is good. So he really motivated me and encouraged me that, you can do this thing, but, it takes time, and there's so much competition between the academic research and the creative writing that the heart wants to do. So there has had to be a lot of planning of the time and being careful and balancing, because even though you want to sit and write poetry, and it's not going to take you up the academic ladder and so on. So I've had to do a lot of suppressing of the instincts and the desires to write and so on. I want to thank the Department of Literatures in English. They have launched all my creative works. Carlene Cooper was the one who launched Aunt Jen, and there was a double launch, as Cordella said. her Songs of Silence. And Michael Buckner and you. And I thank you for your support. And I see Professor Warner Lewis here, who was one of the first persons to write a review of, can you imagine how I felt in those days? All these great professors taking time out to write reviews of my book. And I've never forgotten that review that you wrote of Aunt Jen, and it was published in the Caribbean Quarterly, yes? And Aunt Jen has done extremely well, very, very well. Was translated to German very early after it was published. And that German translation won that year the prize for the best translated book. And there's a whole story behind that and so on, and how I worked with the German translator, with the Creole, and so on. But it has been exciting, and it's, as Professor Baugh said to me just a few years ago, he came back, and I saw him, and I ran down the corridor to greet him. And he said, you know, I read Aunt Jen again a few months ago, and because he was giving it to his granddaughter. And he said, every time I read it, I see something else. It's the book that keeps giving and giving. And just the support and the encouragement from different individuals in the Department of Literatures in English and the department as a whole. And Dr. Mosley Wood, I did study in the Department of Literatures in English as well. So I did literatures in English and in Spanish. I also must thank my own department, the Department of Modern Languages and Literatures, for their support. I have to thank Miss Clark and Miss Clue and Mr. McCook, because I had to rely on them heavily to do the planning. They just took the planning and did a lot of work in getting us here this evening. I want to mention somebody who had a big part to play with both my novels. A lot of people wouldn't know. We've been friends for many, many years. And even though many years ago, Professor Warner Lewis took me to her study on Milverton Crescent and said, stop the foolishness. You need to sit at the computer and type. And I said, I don't want to. I want to write on paper. You don't remember that? And you said, type from scratch. And I said, I can't. I have to write on paper. I still write on paper. I love paper. And if you find a paper that has passed through my hands, you'll see all kinds of things on it. Drawings, scribblings, names, Spanish, Creole, every language you can think of, right? I just love to write on paper. So Althea Akins, where is Althea? Althea, stand up and let them see you. Althea is it? Probably the one person who can read my handwriting properly well, right? Everybody else has a problem with my handwriting. Althea typed Aunt Jen, and Althea typed Letters Home how many years after. Different people have typed different things over the years, but I enjoy writing on paper, so leave me alone. I like typing on paper, right? Keela, I want to thank. Keela was one of the editors of Through the Hibiscus Hedge, and we forgot to say the main place at which it's available is through Barnes & Noble Bookshop. Thank you very much. I laid hands on Keela at very short notice, and I want to thank you for being kind and generous and helpful. But I thought you were the best person, here, because you had done so much work with the editing with me. And it's funny, you asked me to give you an excerpt, and I said, I'm not giving you anything, but I was hoping you would have read from Caleb. And I thought that was very good. I have to thank Mr. Hawthorne. I've known Mr. Hawthorne for many, many years, from I was a little girl in school, I think. And he plays many, many instruments, and I wanted him to play. This one is the bassoon. This is the bassoon? Yes. And thank you very much for he plays at all our family funerals, at Mona Church events, at all kinds of things. Thank you. I need to thank the publishers, thank Hodder, and Hodder has been extremely supportive. I went to the UK in October for their Black History Month, and because there was so much Windrush celebration, and we went all over the UK presenting Letters Home. Letters Home, and then people wanted to hear about Angen, and that went very well. I thank the UWI, it's Canoe Press, for doing this thing that is not a thing. And I thank the Jamaica Library Service because they have done some promotions of the work and so on. I want to thank MITS for their support. I think they have gone, but they're always ready to support us when we have events like this and come and set up and get the place ready for all kinds of technological experiments and what have you. I have to thank Curdella. Let me come back. Let me leave Curdella and go back to Fabian and thank you for how you spiced up the thing. And the thing that is not a thing, right? I really loved what you did. As I've told you before, I love your interdisciplinary approach. And you read some of my favorite poems. The Jamaican Uglyman Syndrome is really one of my favorite poems. So thank you very much. Curdella gave us such an erudite, excellent reading of Letters Home. And I told her 15 minutes. And I'm sure that was about, how long, Mr. McCook? 30 minutes. And if she were here, I know she would have gone on longer. But the reason I love what she did with the book, because she did one interview with me years ago not years, because the book just came out the other day. But she was going to do a conference paper, and she sent me some questions by WhatsApp, and I responded to them and so on. But I'm just intrigued by how much she understood and went beyond even what I set out to do with the book. One of the things I wanted to do with the book was to show how the history of Caribbean people is so multifaceted, multidimensional, linked. I wanted to present some of that great migration story that we have, and how our migration story is not just this linear, monolithic thing, but it's this complex network of people, Jamaicans, Trinidadians, people from all over the Caribbean, going all over the world. And some of the same people went everywhere. And they went at a time when it was difficult to travel. It was challenging to travel. It's not like now when you just book a flight online and you jump on the plane and you're gone. It took days for them to go, but some of them went to Panama, went to Costa Rica, went to Nicaragua, went to the Caribbean coastline of Colombia. Some of the same people who went and built the Panama Canal then decided, I'm not ready to go home, crossed and went over to Costa Rica, then came down that coastline, all of that coastline, from Corn Island, coming right down, going right across San Andres Providenciales. And some of them turned around and went to Ecuador. So we have a whole population of Jamaican descendants in Ecuador. Some of those same people went up into the middle there to Cuba. So we have, this is why we are all over the place. So I wanted to speak to some aspects of the experiences of Windrush and post-Windrush people. And I have I have I don't know if it's good fortune or what, but I have most of my mother's family live in England. My uncles, my mother's sisters, and so on. So over the years, I've had an opportunity to talk to these people, to have them share their memories and their experiences. And I've always known that I want to write about some of it on their behalf. One of the issues they have with the whole Windrush narrative is that, as she was saying, and she had asked me about that, they did not go on any of the Windrush voyages. And they feel like, I have an uncle who feels very strongly about it, and he says, they are stereotyping us. They have lumped all of us together. I'm not a Windrush person, and they are calling all of us Windrush. In other words, it sounds, from the official perspective, it seems to be a comfortable and convenient way of classifying people, just putting all of them together, they are Windrush. But the people want their individualities. They want people to recognize that, no, I came on the SS Irpinia, I came on the Auriga, and so on and so on. And they know that period, that is Windrush period, and they don't want to be homogenized like that. And there are lots of stories. So the next book has to be a continuation of. So, and Jen sort of hinted at the existence of that experience, the experience of Caribbean people in the UK in particular, and going all over the world because of the movement of Caribbean people. The next book, which I have in my head, which I've been walking around in my head for a long time, is going to also be on another aspect. There, as she said, there are so many narratives that are part of this master narrative. So, I should stop. Are you coming back, Dr. Mosley-Wood? Yes. So, thank you all very much. I thank everybody. I thank my students. I see Ashley there. But I thank my colleagues. But I want to thank the people from my church because they have been very, very faithful over the years. And if it weren't for the rain, you would see the whole church here. So I want to thank them because every time there's anything that I do, they've been there behind me, beside me, 100%. And I thank you very much. Errol Horton, I'm senior, some past students too, Peter Gay, Betty, and so on. Thank you all very much.
Well, it just remains for me to once again thank each and every one of you for coming, and to say to Professor Ramsay, congratulations on this marvelous achievement, and thank you again. I will not go through the vote of thanks all over again. Paulette has done that. But thank you very much for that piece. Thank you, everybody. We do have refreshments outside afterwards, so please spare a little time to gather and have something to eat. Thank you.